Welcome to the next session about the watershed methodology that Plant with Purpose is using to transform communities stuck in rural poverty. Before their staff explains how it works, I wanted to explain why we've committed over $3 million this year to expand the program. My name is Paul Penley. I'm a managing director at Excellence in Giving. We're a national philanthropic advisory firm that helps high-capacity families across the country invest in effective, faith-based solutions to the world's toughest problems. Our clients give away more than $70 million a year, so my team evaluates hundreds of ministries to get the giving right. We've tracked Plant with Purpose for over a decade now, and I'll tell you, they weren't ready for multi-million-dollar investments 10 years ago, but they're ready today. We've recently picked apart the leadership, strategy, finances, and impact of Plant with Purpose to determine whether a new Christian grant-making collective called the Kingdom Giving Fund should invest $2.6 million in the growth of the watershed restoration programs in the Congo. After reviewing internal documents and interviewing the board, the staff, and even local Congolese pastors who participated in the pilot program, our conclusion was this: Plant with Purpose has a strategy and the results to literally bring people out of rural poverty. Very few ministries have such well-documented impact. The watershed methodology actually has a spillover effect in communities where neighbors who aren't even directly involved in the programs see a significant reduction in key poverty indicators simply because of the larger impact on the environment and the way that neighbors share what they're learning. The bottom line is this for us: Plant with Purpose's intervention erases the need for school scholarships, food handouts, free clinics, and child sponsorship, because now the family can take care of their own needs through increased income that's partially spent on education, health care, and more nutritious food, and partially saved for the next emergency or small business opportunity. Evaluating ministries for the past 12 years has shown me that the intention and ambitions of most ministries tends to be better than their execution. But Plant with Purpose is getting it right. They are ready to handle significant investment in their proven and cutting-edge watershed programs today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Corbin Small, and I am grateful to be with you today, and very, very pleased to get to introduce some of the most important and smartest people on the team in Plant with Purpose in the United States. And I want to just let them introduce themselves. This is our programs team and our technical teams. And I'll note that Grace is not currently in the United States, but I'll let her introduce her for herself. But thanks for joining us today as we talk about why the watershed model and just how Plant with Purpose's approach has the opportunity, and we've already seen it have such an incredible impact, and why we're investing so heavily in this model. And we want to dive into it a little bit deeper today. So Corey, would you go ahead and start off introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Corbin. My name is Corey Chin, and I'm on the international programs team, and I'm the monitoring and evaluation manager.
I'm Grace Fabri Santos, and I am the programs operations specialist, and I am currently located in Ecuador, but soon to be joining the team in San Diego.
I'm Bob Morikawa, director of the programs department that's responsible for working with our partners and promoting this watershed model, and the fourth smartest person on this call.
And Bob's located just outside of the United States in Toronto, Canada. Let's jump right in here, and we've got a lot to cover. So Bob, can you go ahead and lead us off here?
Yeah, so this, is a picture taken in Haiti as a farmer planting trees and doing some soil conservation. And I wanted to relate the story of an experience I had many years ago in Haiti, where a farmer was explaining to us, a group of visitors, how he had, carefully planted a bunch of trees and done a bunch of soil conservation work to protect his farm. But he lived on a slope, and all the people up the hillside, big long hillside, had not done the same kinds of taken the same kinds of protective measures on their farms. So there was a big rain, probably a tropical storm, and all that water had come rushing down the hill unimpeded and wiped out, all that careful, hard work he had done. And he was, really discouraged, and I was discouraged listening to his story. And that's the kind of thing we've seen happen all around the world, where if you work with one farmer or if you only work with one community, it has, yes, a positive effect and it has a benefit for farmers. But if all those people in that same area that are impacted by water and rain work together, the impact is so much greater. And that's what we're going to talk about in more detail today.
That's super helpful, Bob. It makes me think about, actually it makes me think a long ways back to even the founding of Plant with Purpose. Just thinking, we were founded in 1984, but even before that, kind of the impetus behind the founding of Plant with Purpose was in 1979, Category 5 hurricane, one of the deadliest hurricanes on record in the world, with 175-mile-an-hour winds, swept across the Dominican Republic and devastated the island. And what the founders saw was this huge trend of rural to urban migration, where people whose land had degraded, their soils eroding, their income source of agriculture decreasing, these families were leaving the rural countryside and moving into urban cities and urban slums, looking for economic opportunities and ways to provide for their families. And so, yeah, the founding of Plant with Purpose really is this story of literally and figuratively looking upstream at some of the root causes of poverty that the founders first experienced while delivering food aid after Hurricane David in a densely populated slum. So maybe we could segue and just jump right into Grace. Would you share a little bit, like, what is a watershed? This is not terminology that's necessarily everyday common language. Is it super complicated and hard to understand?
Yeah, it is something we don't talk about a lot, but it's something that we live in. It's all around us. So a watershed is an area of land that shares common streams or rivers that lead to a common body of water. So the biggest watershed begins up here in the Andes where I live. So the Amazon River Basin is one of the biggest watersheds in the world. And so it's all these small little creeks that lead down off the mountains and in to the Amazon River Basin and eventually out into the Atlantic Ocean. So that's an example of a huge watershed, but there's small ones. So all of those big ones are divided into smaller ones with one of their main rivers rather than the Amazon, maybe a smaller river, and they can also lead into lakes and all different types of water. So it's something to do with our geography, and we don't really think of it that way, but it normally starts from, as you can see in this image, from a ridge on one side, and on the other side in the river, all the rivers going into a main water source.
One of the important things about that is that everybody and everything in this watershed is not only connected by the river, but they often have economic ties. You can see there's industrial areas and farming areas, water sources, and all of those places together are connected socially, ecologically, hydrologically as well.
So if I'm on Earth, am I in a watershed?
Absolutely. Wherever you are, you're in a watershed.
Well, so what does it have to do? Corey, maybe you could share a little bit on, how do we get into working in watersheds, and how do you even practically begin to implement this in a program? Plant with Purpose has worked kind of at the intersection of environmental restoration, economic development, and spiritual renewal, for 36 years. and this is a relatively new way of operating for us. You know, maybe you could share a little bit about what it looks like practically.
So the two maps on this slide are obviously from the same location, and the one on the left is the hydrologic boundary, which is the watershed boundary that is delineated based on just pure elevation. And so we've done this with a computer using satellite imagery. We're thousands of miles away, and it's a fairly exact science. But what we've learned is through the years of implementing this as a program boundary, there's local realities that need to be considered when defining the program watershed boundary. And so the image on the right is the program boundary on the black boundary, and you can see the difference. It's very subtle. And at the bottom, it turns out in this location, there's a lake on the right, Lake Tanganyika. And many people who live at the bottom of the watershed, you can sort of see represented by those blue dots. Many of those people actually farm or harvest trees or make a living up in the watershed. They walk up very regularly, maybe daily. And so if we were to just use the hydrologic boundary as a hard line, we would be excluding a lot of people who are actually impacting and living off of the watershed. And so we found that by using the watershed as a foundation for our program boundary, we can bring together the physical, social, and logistical factors that are realities for the people who live there. And I've liked the term geographic solidarity, because these are people who live off of the land and they're all affected by each other's actions.
You know, I think one of the things that's important here is, you know, exactly in this idea of moving from concept to practice, the concept of a watershed is relatively easily understood, and lots of organizations and you know, actors are familiar with the concept, but getting it to become a practical reality involves exactly the kinds of mapping work and negotiation with local teams and community leaders that Corey's talking about. And the process from getting the map on the left to the map on the right represents often many weeks or months of intense discussion and negotiation.
So another reason that we like the watershed model is that we've observed through our impact data that by focusing our efforts in a concentrated geography, we see a greater impact. And so in addition to the upstream and downstream effects that Bob was just talking about, I think two other big reasons why we see a greater impact by working in one concentrated watershed is that one, a lot of what we do is around regenerative agriculture trainings. And so not only do the participants adopt improved farming techniques, but our data shows that the participants share these practices with non-participants who also live in the watershed, and we create lasting behavioral change in the whole watershed. And the second reason is that our work positively impacts the environment. And so we're able to see a lot more significant change on the surrounding ecosystem by concentrating our work and working with a significant portion of the population in the watershed. So these two images, the map on the left and the photo on the right, are from Nyakazu in Burundi. And the map on the left shows pink dots, which you can see is our historical extent of how our work was spread out geographically. And in 2017, we made a shift in Burundi to concentrate our work into 4 priority watersheds. And so the green dots there show our newer groups, which are tightly clustered around the Nyakazu Gorge, which is the photo on the right. And this area is a protected park and a biodiversity hotspot. We're actually collecting impact evaluation in this watershed right now, and we're really excited to see the results.
You know, I think you can see even some of the practical implications of this if you're a staff member in Burundi and you're having to travel to all these different places, you know, on a motorcycle, for example, that takes a lot of time. You're, you know, exposed to risk on the road. By concentrating in one area, just even at a logistical level, you've got a certain amount of benefit there, just from a planning point of view, not to mention all those other things that Corey mentioned.
You know, I think that's a great transition just to sharing like why the watershed model one of the reasons that the watershed model has the potential to change the way that organizations do community development in rural areas is the logistical challenges that it helps to solve. And in one of those ways, you know, if you've partnered with Plant with Purpose for a number of years, you know that the way that we do economic development and help families gain access to financial services hasn't always looked the same. We used to be more of a traditional microfinance lender, helping families to have access to small loans when they couldn't get access to those from other places. But we manage the portfolio through local innovation and learning from our programs director in Tanzania. We gained insight to another methodology that would help us to decrease our cost of operation and have a tremendous impact, positive impact in the way that families are able to access capital. And that was moving from the traditional microfinance model into a savings-led model, which encouraged families to save the money for themselves in a small group and then to begin to lend to one another. And what that did organizationally for us is it really helped to create a strong modular organized base of groups of 25 families that we could teach sustainable agriculture courses within. These groups are highly organized, highly motivated, because the results happen relatively quickly as families discover they didn't realize they could save. And when they do save, they didn't realize they could save so much. And so that shift for us created one of the modular building blocks that was critical for us as we now have expanded into thinking about a watershed model, where it's a larger modular building block for organizational efficiencies. Just stopping right there with organizational efficiencies is a fantastic reason to think about the watershed model and concentrating your efforts, because investing in rural community development is more expensive. It's more expensive because it's further from the cities. It's often overlooked, and yet 85% of the world's poorest families are rural subsistence level farmers. So how do we move forward in a way that invests in this group of people who have often been overlooked or underrepresented by their governments, by the nonprofit community, by social services? How can we help to reduce the cost to operate in these places while increasing the efficiencies and the impact? And Bob mentioned already, just talking about the interconnectedness. When we're talking about social, environmental interconnectedness within a watershed, but that modular building block of what Grace referred to as, you have a huge basin, the Amazon River Basin, which is made up of lots and lots of sub-watersheds. And so when we're talking about operating in a sub-watershed, all of those are interconnected into a bigger river. And when you take that subgroup of a savings group of 25 families, and you can figure out how many groups you need to reach in order to maximize your impact in a sub-watershed, you have a really good operating model for projecting costs of your work in a region. And what we're doing currently is just gathering more and more information about concentrating efforts in watersheds. What you see on the screen here just is a really basic chart that helps our staff to be able to manage the different levels of our programs that are being taught within savings groups that are within sub-watersheds. Somebody else can probably sum that up even in a simpler way than I was trying to, but it's a huge benefit to organizations to drive down the costs while concentrating your efforts and creating a strong modular building block for your programs.
No, I think that was well said, Corbin. I think if we think of that modularity, if I can use that word, at that group level, the savings group level, and then a series of savings groups in a watershed, and then just if you look at this sort of bar at the bottom, I think this sort of summarizes very briefly what we see as the trajectory over the lifetime of a watershed. So we go into a watershed, we establish agreements, and then groups are formed, and these are self-formed groups. They're completely voluntary. They receive the kind of training that Corbin was describing over several years. They grow stronger. They apply this knowledge on their own farms. We continue to support them at, maybe at a less intensive level than these first two phases. And at some point, those groups are able to, apply those regenerative practices with confidence, and they're having a huge impact on that watershed. And we would think about the idea of, leaving that watershed. We call it graduation, because we see it as a transformation of that area, and that we're no longer needed. So we can move on and apply our limited resources to other places that are in greater need. So that's the basic concept. And because we're working in that modular way that Corbin described, it allows us to think about planning at this level. So this is a series of slides. I guess we'll scroll through these quickly so you see what this actually looks like in real life. And this is Kakumba that Corey already mentioned in Eastern Congo. And these are a couple of watersheds where we've started working already, and we're projecting to work in some new watersheds, which I'll show you very briefly here.
So those blue dots are representing savings groups, which each of those blue dots accounts for 25 families. And what you're basically looking at is the amount of savings groups that it will take for us to reach 50% of saturation of the eligible population with the programs of Plant with Purpose. So we don't believe that we need to reach every single person for the reasons that we've kind of shared already, because we see the spillover effect that takes place. But right there, you're looking at 50% saturation across 11 watersheds. And what's fantastic is we're able to take this model. We know what it costs to start in a watershed, and we're able to scale it up. And so, Bob, if you'll slide back again to 2020, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, 2020, this is today, and in the next 5 years, this is the growth that's going to take place in the Democratic Republic of Congo to reach, to benefit over 150,000 people. So it's just an incredible, incredibly exciting way to take something to scale. Something that has been tested at the small scale, to apply funding to it and to see that rapidly grow.
So what is it that we see? We've talked about these benefits and people being connected in a watershed and the savings groups. So this is an example of some of the kinds of things that we are measuring and seeing positive change. So this map on the left is an NDVI map, and that is a way of measuring vegetative cover. So basically the dark green areas are higher levels of vegetation, and the lighter green or yellow areas are areas of lower vegetation. And we can collect data like this. It's all satellite data that's publicly available over many years. We can go back in time. In this particular graph on the left, it goes back from 2000 up to 2017. And this graph is showing an NDVI change, or vegetation change, in the Dominican Republic. And you can see that over time, the level of vegetation is actually increasing in our project areas. And we're seeing this kind of change in many of the watersheds where we're working, not just in the DR and in Haiti, but in most of the partner countries where we work. So that's something we can track with real numbers and with external data from satellite imagery from NASA. And so that's one way we have of confirming that we're actually having a real and positive impact at that watershed level.
So NDVI, we could spend hours explaining and digging into that. And in fact, Bob would love to do that. And everybody would leave 100 times smarter than they were when they started the presentation.
Oh, I thought you meant just
But-
everybody would leave.
If you're in a presentation on watersheds already, I highly doubt that they would leave. So this image right here is a before and after of a project area in the Dominican Republic. So it just gives you a really clear picture of the work that farmers are doing to restore their land, and what this represents. And you can go to the next slide where it'll show a GIF that will actually kind of pan through 3 different photos. But in case it's not clear already, when we're talking about reforestation and agroforestry, the benefits that it provides to families is it diversifies the biodiversity of the area where the farmers live or are farming. It provides additional sources of income as farmers regenerate their land. It increases the soil quality. Agroforestry is the process of mixing crops and trees together and having their benefits that serve one another, that ultimately increase the incomes of farmers who see the increase in soil quality and then also can sustainably harvest from their land. But yeah, just a really wonderful before and after. The beautiful thing about this is that we don't work in one place forever. That's part of our sustainability model is we are a teaching and training organization, and we truly see the families that we work with as partners. And so we have no desire to stay in a place forever. But yeah, you can see the community where this photo is taken is graduated from our programs. And if you were to imagine the situation that the farmer was in 2003 with that piece of land to the where the farmer's at today, with the piece of land that's fully reforested and producing, and it's a wonderful result.
And just a couple of quick technical notes. The white wispy things here, probably pretty obvious, but just in case you're wondering, that's cloud cover, which is an issue sometimes with remote sensing. The other thing is that these photos are taken at more or less the same time of year, and so we are comparing apples to apples. I have seen sort of before and after comparison photos where the first photo is taken at a very dry season, and then the after photo is taken in a rainy season. So just that alone can make a huge impact on how the photo looks. But in this case, we are comparing similar seasonal times.
I didn't mention this in the very beginning, but I am a regional representative, and my role is building relationships here in the United States and fundraising. And I just want to appreciate the programs and technical team for their level of integrity and honesty, and always wanting to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples, because unfortunately that can be a thing that exists in the fundraising world where people are trying to do good and can ultimately present misleading data or make claims. If anything, Plant with Purpose consistently falls into the category of not making the claims that we probably could be making in the sake of just absolute wanting to just put all of our impact evaluations through the most rigorous standards and holding up, having scientific papers that are peer reviewed and so yeah, just I appreciate, Bob, that those are that's one of the things that you pointed out in that image, that we are comparing apples to apples. That's really important.
Thanks, Corbin. Speaking of impact evaluation, this is an impact evaluation year for us. We do impact evaluation every 3 years. So the last one was 2017, and now we're just starting to get some data in. And this is some focus group or participatory workshop data from Tanzania. And I don't know, Grace, if you want to sort of run through some of these results and share what this means in terms of what communities are saying about impact in watersheds.
Sure. Yes, this is, as Bob was saying, hot off the press. It's really new data, and we're excited to be diving into it and seeing what's been happening. So we have been hearing, and this is right out of from our farmers. So this is what they're saying, what they're seeing in their land around them. This is from Tanzania, and they're saying how they've begun to see some endangered species come back as they have been working in their land and reforesting. So that's really exciting. They're seeing health improved, which is really amazing to see how they're connecting. The health of the land and the environment is also affecting human health and nutrition and all of those things. Also, they're saying conflicts and households have decreased as their land has become reforested and revived. And also something that's interesting is as there are more people growing trees, there is firewood that's more available. And so there isn't the pressure to be going into the native forests and be cutting down trees there, but they're able to buy firewood that is lumber that's made to be cut down rather than trees that are hundreds of years old. And also an exciting thing that they've been saying is that there hasn't been as many landslides, which is really exciting as erosion is becoming less as there's more trees to nourish the earth and hold the soil together.
I think we would be remiss not to comment at this moment, in the fall of 2020, when we have very arid conditions and extreme wildfires across the United States. I'm here in Colorado, and we just are getting containment of what has become the largest wildfire fire in Colorado history. The West Coast just getting having so many fires that are just decimating, and hard to control. And sometimes it feels a little bit far away when we talk about watersheds in Eastern Congo. But the reality is when you think about the environment here in our own backyards, nearby us, when there's fires like that, when the forests are removed from the mountains and then the rains come, we end up with landslides. We end up with massive amounts of soil erosion and damages that are caused. And for me, at least, the primary, there's 100 differences, but one of the primary differences is I don't live off of my land. And so to have somebody reporting that landslides haven't occurred because they are implementing techniques that are building back forest cover, ground cover, and allowing rainfall to infiltrate into the soil so that it can refresh and renew water tables, so much so that we see families reporting improvement in health. All of that is just remarkable, and it's really not as far away from us as we might imagine if we start to look.
Yeah, I think the other sort of powerful thing to me about this kind of response, I mean, the fact that it's positive is great, but it's also the way that they're talking about, we mentioned in the beginning how a watershed is this kind of holistic thing with all these interconnections, but that's being clearly expressed in these kinds of answers, the connection to health, the connection to conflict. The landslides is talking about change, not just at a household level, but at a landscape level. These are, and like Grace said, these are the things that farmers are telling us about the changes that are taking place.
Yeah, Bob, can you shift and talk a little bit more about conflict and peace and reconciliation?
So this is again a picture from Congo in a small church in sort of the upper part of the Kakumba watershed. It's a full day's fairly grueling walk, which Corey and I have done to get there. Somehow they've still managed to get an electric guitar up there. Anyhow, farmers in this area are talking about things that go beyond, sort of the biological changes. People talk about economic change. They talk about, tree cover and so on. But the farmers and communities in this area of Eastern Congo are seriously impacted by conflict. If you followed, the news in this part of the world at all, there's a lot of different armed groups running around and fighting with the government, fighting with each other. And one of the things that happens is that youth who are, essentially disenfranchised, they have nothing to do, they don't see farming as a future option for them, they don't have jobs to go to or find, so they join an armed group, and this becomes a way of sort of surviving and making a living. And even in this area of Kakumba, this is something that happens. In the past couple of years or more, armed groups have come through this area and tried to recruit, and the community leaders in this watershed are taking action. They're standing up to this kind of recruitment. They're telling the youth in their area, taking a strong stand, and they're having an impact. And it's because of the hope and the changes that they're seeing that they see as worth standing up for and investing in. And that's actually, I know a story of an armed group that came through and tried to recruit and spent a few days in some villages in this area, and then quickly moved on because they could see that they weren't going to get any traction. And that's just so exciting, I think, to us to see that the, as Corbin said, the downstream and upstream impacts of the work that these farmers and communities are doing.
That's awesome.
Talking about our future impact, and these two images are theoretical. The points in the images are actually theoretical, and these were used pretty early on in our planning process. This is, again, looking at Kakumba watershed in the DRC. And so the image on the left, the left and right show the same number of points, which represent savings groups. And so the image on the left is if you did them randomly, however was convenient, or maybe inconvenient, but whoever signed up. And the one on the right is using the watershed model. And that's what our work ended up looking like and looks like all around the world now. And like we've already talked about, we're seeing a much greater impact by working like this. And poverty reduction extends throughout the entire watershed with participants and even non-participants, which is really exciting. And all of our work that we're planning right now and doing is at a watershed level.
Corbin alluded before to the idea of building blocks. So we've got those two fundamental building blocks that we work with, the savings group and the watershed. And sort of by bringing those two together, that becomes sort of these powerful planning tools that allow us to sort of work with communities as effectively as possible and scale that work in a way that is easily manageable by us as a program and also for the communities that are involved. You can imagine a group of communities, the green dots on the right, they know each other. They have economic exchange with each other. They probably speak some of the same languages, although there are multiple languages in that watershed as well. But the connectedness between those different groups and their ability to then work together. And if we think back to that story that we talked about at the beginning with the lone Haitian farmer applying conservation techniques on his land, now you've got dozens or hundreds of farmers doing the same thing in the same space, and it just multiplies the impact of that. One last maybe detail to share, but I think it's an important one when we're talking about future impact. We're trying to illustrate with this one bit of data that we're sharing here. This is looking at girls attending secondary school. And Corbin alluded earlier, we alluded earlier to the difference in differences study that we've done comparing a treatment watershed and a comparison watershed where we're not working. So this data here is looking specifically at non-participants only. Non-participants in that comparison watershed, which is indicated with the tan color, and non-participants in the treatment watershed, which is indicated in the green color. And you can see in that period of time where we did the study from 2015 to 2017, the number of girls in going to secondary school in that comparison watershed has really not changed, or it may even have gone down a little bit. Whereas in the treatment watershed, the number of girls in secondary school has actually pretty much doubled in terms of their families' ability to send their girls to school. And again, this is among non-participants. So when we're talking about watershed transformation, what we're seeing is not only are the people we're working with, not only are their lives changed, but that economic spillover, the strengthening of the economy and the opportunities that are created, the greater productive farms, the protection of the land, is also spilling over to people who aren't even involved in the program. And that really is, in a way, it's kind of a minor detail, but it's also very important to our understanding of why this is such a good approach for us, why we're convinced that it's working, why it's multiplying our ability to use our limited resources in these places and not only impact the families that we directly work with, but even others, the neighbors, the friends, the people down the road that are in that space. And so that really is another reason why we see this approach as transformative for our work and transformative for the places that we're working.
That's huge. Yeah, there's so many great impact stats that we got from that differences study from Eastern Congo. This one is particularly exciting. You know, Plant with Purpose doesn't pay participants to send their daughters to school, so it's exciting on a lot of different levels. You know, first being that girls in school is a widely known and understood metric for how we can work to reverse poverty globally. You know, how can we get more girls into school? Because girls are often the ones that are pulled out of school the quickest when families experience hardships and have to make difficult decisions. And we know that educating women has too many benefits to number. And so we have to figure out ways to help keep girls in school. What's one of the things that's exciting about that is that we're not paying those families to put those girls in school. This is it's looking at the impact of Plant with Purpose's work in that watershed that's resulting in families building resilience, building the ability to be able to keep their girls in school or to put their girls back into school. And having this kind of data is just really helpful to see that. So yeah, and then on the other level of just the interconnectedness that we see at working at the watershed level, that this is not just looking at direct participants of Plant with Purpose's programs, but that this spills over into the entire watershed, and that non-participants are benefiting. It's incredibly exciting. It's the kind of data that has gotten so many people excited about this work in Eastern Congo. It's why we have transitioned our programs. It's one of the reasons why we've transitioned our programs globally to focusing on a watershed model, and why we're taking it to scale now. The programs in Eastern Congo, we're multiplying those by 5 times this year and really taking them to the next level to continue to prove this methodology, because we do believe that this is something that we can share beyond ourselves, beyond Plant with Purpose. So to close things up, I want to just say thank you to Corey and Bob and Grace. Thank you for your leadership at Plant with Purpose in driving these conversations and more importantly, in asking the questions of our program partners that help us to understand them, their needs, the opportunities in a way that drives us to learn and grow and to be better. I'm incredibly grateful to serve on a team with each of you, and excited about this next season of our work at Plant with Purpose. You know, to circle back to the founding of Plant with Purpose in Santo Domingo, I think it's a really, really beautiful image to look at. I don't know if anybody on this call has ever been to the Dominican Republic, but if you fly into the airport in Santo Domingo, driving to the colonial old town part of the city, you drive across a bridge, and that bridge crosses Rio Ozama. And one of the primary target watersheds that we're working in today is actually the headwaters of the Rio Ozama. And so I mentioned earlier that we were founded literally and figuratively looking upstream. And now today we're focusing on working with thousands of families at the most important, the headwaters of the most important river in the Dominican Republic. In the same way, we're working at the headwaters of the most important river in Haiti, the Artibonite River, which actually originates in the Dominican Republic. It's a beautiful picture of God's kingdom where we're investing in these families. They're seeing economic, spiritual, environmental improvements on their lands, their communities, and in their watersheds. But even beyond their watershed, the impact is experienced downstream. And so thanks for the work that each of you are doing. Thanks for everybody's prayers, for your support, for investing in the lives of rural farmers. This is investments that are really needed and that we do not take for granted, and we're so grateful for. So thank you for your participation in this with us. We're so grateful to have you as part of the Plant with Purpose family. Thanks so much, everybody.